Welcome, everyone. I'm Phyllis Klein, and this is Poets in Conversation. I'm really happy to be here tonight with Karen Poppy and Sonia Greenfield, two poets I've immensely enjoyed getting to know as people and through their poetry. They write with fierce desire to bring hearts and minds into their work, to make the world a better place, and they do. There's a wildness in them, just like the fox in Karen's poem we'll hear, a brave honesty and an intention to ease the bitterness in life we have all tasted. Both Karen and Sonia write because they have to try to make meaning and sense out of our difficulties and challenges. Whether it's about antelopes or badass mermaids, little shrimps, the physics of grief, or a pony called loneliness, prepare for a wild ride. I'm going to read a poem now to open us up. And I was thinking about wildness because that's one of the things that I really admire about these two poets, is their wildness. And for me, what it means is letting myself go wherever I want to go without really restraining. So if it's something that I don't know that much about, I'll try to find out about it. If I get a desire to write about something, I want to do it. So lately I've been following that desire, and I've been writing odes. And and the odes are either for medical conditions or for doctors. And usually it's before I go to the doctor, I'll write an ode. And I find it really helpful. And then I'll actually give it to the doctor if it feels right to do that. So I'm going to read one at the beginning and I'll read one at the end. This one is published in Mad Swirl, which is a really cool internet venue. And I wrote this, it had been a while since I went to the gynecologist. And this is called Ode to Gynecology. There's the office waiting room, mostly women, some full-bellied, some dewy. There's a sisterhood of vaginas sitting there, wishing for good checkups. And me, my parts somewhat disheveled, drought-ridden, hoping for redemption. There's the break I took from pap smears and speculums, a vacation from feel ups and feel downs. After all, so many years have departed since I've bled or suffered with my uterus, or had even a wisp of a dream to fertilize one of my long gone eggs. There's the routine, frontal, rear, wait for the sting. There's the doctor, only a female will do, to peer into my worn out walls. Maybe it's a party up inside. Maybe it's a sick day. No streamers or soft guitar music, no gossip or showing off, just a laid up womb. Just a couple of retiring ovaries to greet her latex fingers. Everything's so mixed up down there in the female bush, a crossing of organs, outspouts, and dumping zones. And she'll enter carefully, unafraid, a spelunker, explorer of the hidden. Clothes off, wrapped in a paper gown, I wait for her soft knock. I'm draped in fluorescence, rich with experience. I'll ride her stirrups. I'll give her my fluids, let her clamp in a speculum. I'll watch a ceiling mobile splaying stars and planets into a neon sky. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce Karen. And I'm extremely happy to welcome Karen to this reading. She's a non-binary poet, has work published in numerous literary journals, magazines, and anthologies. Her first full-length poetry collection, Diving at the Lip of the Water, is forthcoming in 2023 with Beltway Editions. Yay. Her chapbooks, Crack Open Emergency, I love that title, published in 2020, excuse me, and Our Own Beautiful Brutality, 2021, are both published by Finishing Line Press. And her chapbook, Every Possible Thing, is published by Homestead Lighthouse Press in 2020. An attorney licensed in California and Texas, Karen Poppy lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. And you can find out more at karenpoppy.com. Her dreams, hobbies, and self-care are, check this out, dismantling the patriarchy, embracing strong queer and feminist community, and eating chocolate. And so I'm going to pass over the wild mic to Karen. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, for that wonderful introduction and your introductory poem. I loved it, and it's a great segue into my first poem, which is titled Womb. I wrote this poem when a lover of mine was having a hysterectomy, and I can tell you she's still a sports car. Here's my poem, Womb. Interior sister, liminal, as in moving toward change, liminal, as in close to imperceptible, close to, as within you. Tender hive, she nested in you, grew thick-walled and large. In her next existence, she will emerge and soar. She will live as a bird, carrying and dispersing seed. She will live as a field of flowers. Bees will dust their legs with her pollen, dance, remember her scent, bring her back to their hive, bring her home to herself. Let's see, and then the next poem is titled Lemons. You didn't know before she told you, lemon juice brings out sweetness of other fruit, allows us to taste mature mouth of sugar. I owe her everything for what she taught you. You and I, we can harbor harsh pulp, envelop rough rind with our lips. We can endure because of what she taught you. What you in turn taught me. We wrap ourselves around each other, taste each other's sweetness. Sun squeezes liquid through gauze cloth, washes our bodies with lemon yellow, preserves us in this moment of hard-won light. The next poem is titled Flee. Death, swim through my body, fingers strong and spread, kick of determined legs, feet elegant, create a dark, cleansing wake. Make me believe you are life, growing, active, an athletic infant. Let me bring you forth, O slender seal, silver and slippery skinned. Grasp my heart like a prized abalone, unaware of its own internal pearlescence. Sink me here rather than surrender me to the light. The following poem is titled Little Shrimp, And I do want to put the content warning of domestic violence, child abuse, and rape. So if these are triggering to anyone, please feel free to momentarily drop off or whatever you may need to do. I just wanted to give that warning up ahead. Little shrimp. An infant, I startle, flinch, and boom when she touches me. Burning pistol, little shrimp. She says years later, it only takes one bad shrimp to make you sick. I, the shrimp though, and so many of her words make me sick. She swells and pukes and purples while pregnant with my bruiser brother. I stay small and hate them both. I hate her the way her mind is clicked in place as a little girl and stayed there, never maturing into wisdom. She will live on in all she teaches me. I didn't know you were a difficult baby, not normal, until I had your brother. He not normal, I sniff him out. I know his sickness. Early, when his broad feet flutter, kick inside her. After his birth, I hover over his crib, plot to pillow snuff out his life. He grows to 6'2", kills 3 strangers. I stay small, little shrimp. I hide under surfaces, keep quiet. Police and journalists waiting and waiting. I make them sick, me silent, not defending my brother, not admitting how I knew all along. I knew where I touched with my shrimp sense, antenna long and feeling, grasping through taste and scent. Swimmerettes, my long appendages for swimming and breathing. These 2 activities, interchangeable, integral to my being. Swimming and breathing, I make my mother sick, though she birthed me from water, opened my screaming, unready lungs to air. She refuses to admit, premature, too early. I make her sick, me swimming and breathing free, while my brother, bricked away in prison, refuses her visits. He blames her and my father. Once upon a time, my father called me little shrimp. He tries to crush me, his eyes bulging as large, as grotesque as his thick temple vein. Stop it, my mother whines, toddler voice, standing back safe as he slams me over and over against a wall. She smiles, gleams, her mouth twisted. Stop it, stop it. My father goes away on business trips. Acrid cologne stench hovers and strikes relentless, as brutal as his brutal hand. My brother would kick in my door, spit on it, tear out my hair. I know Angel. I wait until he sleeps, creep to his bed, punch my brother hard. He cries. I never cry when my father punches me, when my brother grabs my throat. I never cry when my mother insists no one hurts me. Maybe I cry. Maybe I cry an ocean to swim in, to continue to breathe, when my mother insists, nice boys, her best friend's son, don't do things like that. Don't rape a little shrimp of a girl. A girl shouldn't expect a romantic evening to end any other way. Little, but old enough to know better, she says. I drank the wine, I dressed the way I did. I didn't fight. Of course he thought I wanted it. Of course boys will be boys. Only a few years before, my breasts not yet in bud, my translucent skin disgusting her. I can see everything. I see everything. Her silence is visible. My father sticks his tongue down her throat. His eyes opened, looking at me and my brother, making sure we see. She says nothing, giggles, wipes her apron. I feel everything, the wrong of her words, unsure why. She likes to watch soap operas, the occasional miniseries with me on a small TV near the kitchen sink, right near where my father had suctioned his lips on hers. On screen in Technicolor waves, antenna never quite well adjusted, a man kisses a woman in bed, runs his hand up her shiny leg. Look how he touches her leg. He loves her, my mother gasped, transfixed, soap bubbles rising from the sink, refusing to fall or pop. One time, a movie, last summer. Girls in bikinis with breasts I hope to someday have, boys in board shorts, boys who make me queasy. The chubby girl, the awkward one whose mother died, the vulnerable girl who wants so desperately to fit in. Rhoda, younger than those 3 other teens. The 2 boys and 1 girl hold Rhoda down. They hold her down in bright sun and sand dunes. They hold her down, and a boy rips off her bikini bottom and rapes her. My mother says, they shouldn't do that. They could get her pregnant. She says it in a flat voice, her little girl voice, silent about the wrong of rape, silent about Rhoda, her pain, her silence. Rhoda, little shrimp, with short hair like mine, awkward and vulnerable like me, young, without a mother to protect her. I can see through the translucence of her being. So can my mother, who eyes Rhoda and refuses to look at me. I hate my brother, my father, and yes, my mother. I hate those boys and girl who hurt Rhoda. My mother shakes a wet knife. Water flings like spit. See, she doesn't say anything. Makes me sick. I'm just going to leave a moment for silence here. That was a tough poem to get through. The next poem is titled Badass Mermaid, and in talking before the reading about a week ago with Sonia and Phyllis, I came to the realization that yes, the little shrimp became the badass mermaid. So this is a story here of growth and transforming into adulthood and metamorphosis. Badass Mermaid. It is no night to drown in. Lorelei by Sylvia Plath, who had a birthday, her 90th birthday. I believe it was just either yesterday or the day before. Here's my poem, Badass Mermaid. Blood whirls within, whirl of ear, ocean sound. You profound and under deep, hobgoblin, hobbling, hobbling there before I sleep. I in your realm, a siren, not yet, but sobbing. You moving murk, darkness, spies lurk. In winter, I tumbled there, accidentally. I sang within the sea, fathomed I had privacy. Your ears, they bled with my song. Homer's Odysseus told it wrong, or his men told it innocent. Their ears waxed sealed against all sound. I, innocent too, innocently fell asleep, dry-iced, packed in snow that does not freeze, leagues and leagues deep, countless. Before that or after, I don't remember, and probably pointless. I used your shampoo, smiled and combed my hair. Your rage silvered and glinted on your teeth and eye. No matter, soon, back home, spring, somehow, I didn't care. I slept until I woke. Chrysalis cracked on sea floor. I, a mermaid with wings. Lorelei, butterfly, a terrible glistening. Beauty can be frightening. I did not know myself, knowing all I could know. My mind, a mantle ripped off like a sheet at night, became great, one vast I. Then I could write like a seer, everything and everywhere, a messenger. I do not drown, badass mermaid. I breathe water, I breathe air. I derange. Pitched roofs, pitched reefs. I say your name, write your nightmare. Dive back under, scaled with your fear. My tail smacks down, flashed lightning, ear-rending thunder. Irritated clam creates the pearl in turn creates me. Then I create, write, surrender, open a universe, land, and sea. I just want to note about this poem that it is available online. If you look up my name at Badass Mermaid, it will come up as published. And also, I'm not sure, I don't remember if the online publication shows it in the format that came to be. Somehow this poem, when it's on the page and it's on a long page, like you can see the whole poem, is shaped like a mermaid. I did not intend this. This just happened. Also, I don't know that I intend my poems in the way other poets intend their poems. They just happen. So it just happened to be that this poem was shaped like a mermaid. And I don't know that Little Shrimp is shaped like a little shrimp, but I think that it is shaped like the darting movements of a little shrimp, and it can also be found online, published. The last poem I'm going to read that Phyllis had alluded to, having a fox in it, is In That Place. In that place for Robert. Each point sings alive on his fiery amber fur. The fox waiting there in pine's oxblood heat. Autumn perfection. Meditation, a single beam upon outcrop of rock. He nestles and needles, rises and resettles on his muscled haunches. Eyes lock, yours and the fox's. You wish to stand still, forever yield where time launches its impeccable flow, like a river, stirs you to think of everything you see unwinding in the light. A murmur dissolving into meaning. Then the fox says, let this make you what you are. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you, Karen. That was amazing. Don't go away though. Yeah.
I'm staying right here.
Yeah, we want you unmuted. Yeah. And Sonia, why don't you come and join us? Yeah. Um, that was just, there was so much in there. You went from one amazing thing to the next, and I'm so glad you read what you read. And I really appreciate your reading Little Shrimp. I think that was really important. I don't know if you read that before?
No, that was my first reading to an audience of it.
Uh-huh.
Read it aloud as I'm writing it, of course. I
Right.
think most poets do. And
Yeah.
then I've read it since then, but this is my first time, I think, reading it to an audience, and I hope everyone's okay.
Yeah, congratulations on reading that. And it's an amazing work of healing art. And I know, yeah, I know when we were talking about whether you would read it or not, you had said something about, well, maybe it'll be helpful or healing for somebody else to hear it. And I certainly felt that way. So yeah, Sonia, do you want to?
Just there were a lot of so that poem is so braided, right? And sort of returning and has these sort of refrains running through it. But then there are also just these like scenes, these moments that are so like cinematic for like just like a you know like a scene from a movie, and then it moves on really quickly. And I don't mean the movie within the poem, but I mean like that scene at the end with the knife and then the water flying off of it like spit. I was like, that is so like perfectly visual and also incredibly loaded with symbolism. So I thought it was really great the way those moments popped out of that poem. And it was almost like as you were reading it, I was waiting for those next moments to like pop out and sort of stitch it all together. So yeah, really well done.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I actually, when I was first coming back to writing, I had a 17-year creative silence and then came back.
Wow.
And I started with some poems and also by writing a novel also about another type of badass mermaid. And when I was learning how to write a novel, and I'm still learning how to write a novel, and I'm still learning how to write poetry, and I'm still learning how to write different things in different mediums, different genres. But that being said, I'm aiming at some point, I want to get to what we all want to get to, mastery of it. I did read a very important piece of advice to go through every scene as if you are in a movie, as if you're actually moving through scenes of a movie, have that visual quality. And so, Sonia, that was really perceptive of you, because that's actually a piece of advice that is stuck hard with me, and I've tried to take that through.
Well, it's definitely present in your work. So
thank you.
Way to follow that advice.
trying to follow the advice, trying to get there slowly but surely.
And yeah, and that wasn't discussed beforehand either. So so let's see. So in the chat we have Kirsten says beautiful poems. Sandy says, Karen, such a tour de force. The symbolism and image of the shrimp and the mermaid are so iconic and unforgettable. Congratulations on your forthcoming book. Excuse me. And then Perry says, a courageous poem to write and then read. You are an inspiration. And then we have more congratulations from Robbie, and also congratulations on going public with this experience and poem. It's difficult to do. So let's thank you again, and we'll have more to talk about. Why don't we move on? Yeah, really. Why don't
Thanks
we-
so much.
Oh,
I
yeah.
did want to say about Little Shrimp. I did a disclaimer when I published it on Lunch Tickets Amuse Bouche that it's a work of fiction,
Right.
because even though there may be some things in there that are autobiographical,
Right.
perhaps, maybe, there are some parts that are fiction. And so it is definitely a work where those two things are intertwined.
Yeah, and it's a really good and important point to make about poetry in general, which is that we all put in things that aren't necessarily true. I think Sonia and I were just talking about that before the reading started, and it's easy to make things up, and it's perfectly okay to do that. And so we don't always know what's truth and what isn't, and that, I think, that makes it even more special. So
You'll
thanks
have
for
to
saying.
wait. You'll have to wait for my memoirs.
Yeah, well, we don't want to wait too long for those. So let me see. Okay, well, I'll introduce Sonia now. I have to find her bio. And I am I am so happy and excited to have Sonia Greenfield with us. She uses the pronouns she, they, and is the author of 2 forthcoming books, All Possible Histories, which is published by Riot in Your Throat and is coming out in December of this year. And Helen of Troy is High AF, published by Harbor Editions and coming out in January of next year. So she's been quite prolific, and Karen too, actually, publishing in the last year. Sonia is the author of Letdown, which is White Pine Press 2020. Also American Parable, Autumn House 2018, and Boy with a Halo at the Farmer's Market, and that's from 2015. She lives with her family in Minneapolis, where she teaches at Normandale College. She edits the Rise Up Review, love that title, and advocates, check this out now, advocates for neurodiversity and the decentering of the cis het white hegemony. Wow, great. Her hobbies are alpine skiing, playing board and word games, and drinking tea, but not all at the same time. So I'm really, really happy to have you, Sonia, and looking forward to your reading.
Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. I am going to turn a little timer on to make sure that I don't go over. So my hope is I'm going to read some poems that are from All Possible Histories. And then I'm going to read a couple poems from Helen of Troy is High as Fuck. Yeah, so that's the plan. So the first poem that I'm going to read is called Ghost Ship. And some of you have probably heard this one before. And so hopefully I'll read it in a new and different way. But it's about the ghost ship fire that happened in Oakland. And I wrote about it because I lived in the Bay Area for a long time. And I spent a lot of time going to the same kind of parties where these people perished. And so I felt a real kindred with them, both in spirit and in experience. It's just, how fate goes, where I was lucky and somebody else wasn't. So that's the foundation of this poem. Ghost Ship. Oh, let me hit start. There we go. I have been that young, that electrified by the bohemian scene of a city spilling its lights all around me. I have been to parties in sketchy spaces where painters have work on the walls that should be seen by millions, but is seen by the few of us figuring out who we're going to fuck after too much cheap wine drunk from plastic tumblers, figuring out how we're going to make it a country's width away from families, struck out on our own, like explorers getting comfortable with being alone in a wilderness that is actually just a room rented in a house of strangers. I have been that woman high on E, my eyes doll dark, jaw clenched, body ready to swallow pleasure in a million lusty gulps. I know any space we inhabit can become a ghost ship. I have read enough to know stories of wildfires, of boats found empty, of the soul yanked whole cloth from its innocent wearer. But you can't live in fear of the apparition, the adventurers afloat on their rickety structure and cast to a sea of flames. It can happen at any time to anyone. So when music flares up and takes a hold of you, when a swirl of colored spotlights sets you spinning, you have to dance as if the very act of living depends on it. Thanks, friends. This next poem I'm going to read is called Physics Lesson for the Humanities. It was, interesting to be working on homework with my son. And so that's sort of a little bit about what it's like, but it's also a little bit about the life we have with people through social media, I guess. Physics Lesson for the Humanities. In 6th grade physics, my son learns that energy can't be created or destroyed, that it merely changes form and moves around. And I can't help but think about grief in the same way, how it is a force that slips from person to person, how some harbor it for years, how it resides inside them like so much dark matter, how it moves on to fill the next vessel completely. I think too of all those apologies we blow around like snow crystals that never melt here on the tundra of this human condition. Last week, my old dog died, and I collected so many that I ran out of space for them. Every drawer stuffed full of so sorry, building up in drifts in all the corners, so sorry, like dust bunnies under each radiator, so sorry, soft as rabbit fur too, enough to absorb the sound of the wail of grief's loneliness. A week isn't very long, so I'm still keeping a few for myself and sending the rest back into the world. One perfect crystal of apology blown from my palm for the friend whose own dog died. Another sent to the poet whose daughter took her own life. One more for the cousin whose son OD'd. Energy arriving to move us before moving on. So the book, All Possible Histories, used to be called A Pony Called Loneliness. So this poem that I'm going to read you is the one that had informed that prior title, but then something happened where the book got too big and then it got split into 2 different manuscripts. And then the poem that was meant to hold it together wasn't holding it together anymore. So there you go. So this poem, I Want a Pony, has an epigraph. The medium of poetry isn't language, really. It's loneliness, a loneliness that poets transfer to their readers. And that's Dan Chasson. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I don't know. Okay. And the title runs into the first line of the poem. So I want a pony called loneliness. I'll corral him in my front yard, just behind a low white fence. Children on the way to school will bring him carrots and apples, might stroke his shaggy flank, could stop to whisper in his ears, which will twitch to hear such secrets. My loneliness will tease the feral cats that slink from yard to yard, looking for new places to shit. My loneliness would nicker softly in the night when peacocks on a neighbor's roof wake us with their mating cries. My loneliness will want to be saddled and ridden through the hills above the heaving Pacific. My loneliness won't mind a heavy load. And when my loneliness gets very tired, I'll drive him to tender and endless grasses where he will graze, his old gray muzzle mowing toward the west while I walk back to my truck, wiping snot from my nose with a sleeve. Then when I get home, everyone will ask where my loneliness went. I'll say he was so old that it was too hard to see him that way. And my front yard will stand empty, his trough dry, his little lawn gone to hay. It's so funny about that poem. Like, I wrote this pony into being, and then every time I read the poem, I get all emotional about this pony that like doesn't even exist. It's a really funny thing. It's so weird to get emotional about your own poetry. It's like, oh, I must have been working through something there. Apparently I'm still working through it. Okay, but I'm gonna lighten the mood a little bit with the poem. They teased, if you love your dog so much, why don't you marry him, is the title, and it also runs into the first line. They tease, if you love your dog so much, why don't you marry him? And so I did. In a small ceremony under a gazebo by the water he ran into, new suit ruined, and onto our reception, heavy on meat, heavy on his extended relations with their poor decorum and crotch sniffing. So many things we bear for love. You could say that you could say we were in heat that night, the heat that night, hot with the breath of August, and after spins on the dance floor and so many bowls topped with champagne, we all flopped to the floor, panting with joy, or an inability to sweat. That night I dreamt a whelp, half his shepherd's shaggy coat of russet and black, and half my human dignity. But being hybrid, the boy was loyal only to himself. So let's say we kept things chaste. Let's say there is such sweetness to wed for all the right reasons, like a partner beholden unto me, his brown eyes, if not undressing, always asking that we stroll the streets, and through his short years we did. How he pissed a perimeter of safety that we lived within, a ring of neighborhood trees marked as ours. How his muzzle grayed only 6 years in. So yeah, I was raised Catholic. And we used to get the penny saver. I don't know if the penny saver still exists or if anybody's familiar with it, but in the penny saver, there were people who would send in these requests to St. Anthony to help them find the things that they lost. So I have this sort of memory of St. Anthony in my life. And then I started to imagine like this dude whose job it was to find things for people and how overwhelming it must be to have all these requests coming at you. So that was the foundation of this poem, which is entitled Prayer to St. Anthony, Patron Saint of Lost Things. And it has an epigraph. St. Anthony, who received from God the special power of restoring lost things, grant that I may find that which has been lost. Grant that I may find my mojo, misplaced in middle age and replaced with progressive lenses and a penchant for Sunday crosswords. How much mojo have you restored? And what does it look like? And is it usually in the couch cushions with the Apple TV remote? Tony, how many millions of earrings have you found since the beginning of Catholic time? A theoretical glimmering mountain of baubles that reaches your cloud. Is it knobby with pearls and woven through with gold wires? You must manage one hell of a spreadsheet, patron saint of relief, of signs for missing cats, of hopeless pleading for new hymens. Have you any helpers, or does the nervous sweat bead unbidden upon your pate? And do you wipe it with the hem of your brown robe? Do the voices clamor and clamor like cathedral bells ringing in your ears? Tony, do you cry when you can't find a boy because he already sits by your side? And the boy's mother keeps you up all night with her begging, but you are powerless to return anything besides ashen flesh. Do you search in such instances for your own mojo, convinced you're better off restoring heirloom brooches and fountain pens, better at bringing a corgi back from his wandering? Would you like to switch jobs with Francis and frolic for once with the lambs instead of just sending the lost ones home? On the news, I saw you bring a body back from Nam and saw how you reunited birth mother with daughter. We're always losing Tony, Saint Anthony, who received from God the special power of restoring lost things. Where are all the socks, lighters, and wallets, the hair ties, lip balms, and iPhones? Do you keep collections to count in heaven, some calm in the careful numeration of unclaimed car keys? All right. Okay, so the next poem is called Why I Won't Use the Term, and it is a bit of an instructive poem because, well, because you'll see the way we learn stuff about history and how it changes the language that we use. Why I won't use the term. Because if luck could flick time with a thumb like a dime on a table, ringing heads, not tails, it would be my child's helix pinned to a board, then picked apart by a lab coat. My child hauled before Asperger. Speak, boy, and for God's sake, say something clever. I strain toward my son's weird posture, his crooked voice. Herr Doctor, I grab his white sleeve. He can name the stars, the chambers of the heart. Do you see his perfect mouth, eyes alive as a badger? He is not a burden, not a burden, not a burden. Asperger peers into his face, and the child falters, his words skipping as a Victrola needle on a recording of Der Ring. The doctor shrugs, shoves his glasses up, writes something in a folder. At Spiegelgrund, they caught pneumonia, balloons of gas, tigers by their toes. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, 800 children did not pass go. In his folder, it's written epilepsy 2 1/4 Jew. Asperger only groomed his chosen few. Well, let's lighten things up a little bit one more time. And this is a weird poem too, and it's one that sometimes makes me emotional, and I don't know why, because it's just a weird speculative poem. The title is called For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. And some of you may recognize that as supposedly attributed to Ernest Hemingway and supposedly, the 6-word short story that's supposed to be a complete short story by what it implies. But I don't like the narrative that it implies. So I've decided that I'm just going to change that narrative. For sale, baby shoes never worn. You think you know the story, but you don't. My baby was born tentacled. 4 legs and 2 arms taper to tips. A hybrid form you might call freak. His cupid bow lips harden like a beak just before he cries. Golden hued, black slits darken his eyes. I met his father in a cave, but before the ink could clear, all his arms were pulling me near. Yet I wanted him ever since I dropped into the deep, my breath drawn from a tank, him like shadows through water, like dreams flowing through sleep. So no shoes for this boy who reaches up from my breast, his missing hands blessed by every tiny cup that puckers up and suctions a kiss from my lips. His 2 tendrils curl around my smitten face, but it's just like any other child's embrace. So I think I have time for one more poem. And so I will read one poem, the title poem from the chapbook, Helen of Troy is High as Fuck. And the epigraph was taken from the Emily Wilson translation of the Odyssey, which was the foundation for this whole project. Then the child of Zeus, Helen, decided she would mix the wine with drugs to take all pain and rage away, to bring forgetfulness of every evil. Book 4, the Odyssey. If I knew the difference between entomology and etymology, I'd know my either. I'd know if you meant meaning or just a clacking of beetles, just a phalanx of carapace carried by 100 legs, as in centi, or 1,000 as in milli. But my mind is modest these days. Even modestly minded, I know it's no mistake that abduction shares a word with what penetrates me, rape. What do you know from one? Was she merely hogtied and dragged in a flaxen bag from all she ever knew? Or was she pressed face to the dirt and entered? Either way, they say rape. If you wonder what made this face, this curve of cheek, consider how the candlelight catches faint down where my jaw meets this elegance of neck. You must recall my mother was force fucked by a swan, and that's our fate. Our citizenship so tenuous, we even get taken by the birds. You've heard how we bury our children, how we watch war made with wooden horses, how we get dragged to hell because poor Hades needs a date. And as consolation, they give us poppy powder for our wine. I say another dram of dream in mine. I am such a scholar for forgetting, such a student for letting go. I say, set the table to a swarm of servants buzzing in the corners of this opulent palace. I say, anoint the chalice to Menelaus, who lets me be as shit-faced as I please until morning wipes the prior day clean and I can try living again. Until then, I may hallucinate that the 1,000 launched ships never come back. Will you, my guest, drink to that?
Oh, wow. Oh, Sonia. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's Sonia's books that are up on the in the chat. And yeah, wow. So let's open up the conversation. Why don't we do this first? Let's everybody unmute for a minute and let's really give a round of applause and appreciation. Wow. Oh goodness. Michelle says wonderful poems, Sonia. So looking forward to reading the new books. Yeah, couldn't agree more. You know, hearing you read, it's so different for me than reading the poems to myself. And the range of emotion, it is so fantastic when you read them. I just really love how that worked. And we're getting a lot of appreciations, terrific, fired by rage and sadness so often from Robbie. Wonderful poems. Does anybody want to say anything or unmute and raise your hand and all the instructions we gave you? But more than anything, just share what you're feeling or what you're thinking. Yeah, John. Don't forget to unmute.
They changed Zoom on me and the little buttons are all different now. And every time I go to scoot over to get them, it just changes the host screen. Anyhow, sorry. I just want to say, so phenomenal. Both Karen and Sonia, and I love you both, and it was great, and wow, and you two are superb, and thank you for letting me be here and listen.
Thank you, John.
Oh, beautiful, John. Anyone else? We have a lot to talk about, so no worries.
I'll say something.
Yeah, Tony.
So I run a show here in Minnesota, and Sonia's been on it twice. Sonia, or is it once?
I think I can't remember now if I think maybe twice.
Yeah, I think it's twice. And anyway, we're a rarely long running show. Like, we'll be 8 years in February, and I don't know. I'm always trying to get her on. We were trying to get her on in December, and she's going to be gone. Shame. Anyway, she's one of my favorite people to have on. So if any of you run shows or know people who run shows, make sure you book Sonia, because
Thank you, Tony.
it's fun.
Your pal.
Mm. Yeah, agreed. I feel really lucky to have found you. So Karen, I had met Karen on Zoom, and I had asked her who she would like to read with. So that's how Sonia came. And we were, Karen was keeping her fingers crossed that you would say yes.
I was hoping Sonia would join us. So thank you, Sonia. I really appreciate you joining us. And I just still remember when I read the first poem that I read by you. It was Helen of Troy, the Helen of Troy poem, and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked, and I just kept having to read more. And your poem, Pony Called Loneliness, it's one of my favorite poems ever. Like, it's just an amazing poem. And if you do mean it literally, I put it in the chat, if you ever want to explore pony or horse rescue, happy to help direct you. But if it is a metaphorical pony called loneliness, I more than understand that too. I think that
I don't think my yard here in Minneapolis could support keeping a pony. We don't quite have the fair amount of acreage, I'd say, unless it was one of those like really tiny ones, but those are probably like not ethical, because they're probably like bred to be in ways that are probably not ethical. But yeah, no, I mean, thank you. Maybe someday when I've got the acreage, I'll look into that.
I know I don't really have, well, I have, I guess, the acreage, but not the appropriate type of land. It's a kind of suburban land, and my neighbors wouldn't like that the little green grass that we have left in California is being eaten by a pony.
Fair enough.
But there are sponsorships, and I think that those are great. And it feels a little less lonely when you get these things in the mail with the little pony or horse's face. Thank you so much for the hay.
And may I say one more thing?
Oh, of course.
Okay, so sorry, Karen, I love your poems, but this is about Sonia. Please don't be mad at me. I just want to say too, I got let down. And I say this as much as possible. It's a masterpiece. And if this new book is anything like Let Down, it's just gonna blow people's heads off. Let Down is one of the best books I've ever read. I'm obsessed. It's like always near me. Like I have a bookshelf and stuff, but then I have books I really love that I just, keep around me. It's superb and emotional and phenomenal. So I'm just excited about the new book because if it's anything like Let Down, oh my Lord, Let Down has to be like the best book ever. And I don't care. I'll argue, there's like the super famous poets everyone loves or whatever, but Let Down is beyond anything I've ever read. And Sonia is the only poet still to ever just make me lose my mind. I was at a reading and I got so emotional and I cried and so she's the only poet to ever break through my wall and just make me crumble, which is a compliment.
Mm.
But yeah, I love Sonia and she's amazing. And you both as amazing poets.
Mm. Oh gosh. Well, I don't know if anybody is able to actually read your book yet, Karen, or preview it at all, right? Because it's still it's getting there. Is that right?
It's getting there. The publication date should be May 1, 2023. My chapbooks, my 3 chapbooks are available, but I agree also with everyone else that Letdown is great. Go out and get it. Sonia is phenomenal, and your poems, Sonia, they just get me every single time. Don't go away, come back.
Are you getting embarrassed? Yeah. I was thinking, wouldn't it be lovely if the two of you could read to me like just every so often?
Sure, Phyllis. I mean, I don't see why not.
Yeah, I
Little
mean,
bedtime story, something.
it doesn't have to be a bedtime. Just call me up and read me one of your poems. I mean, it's
Oh my God, that should be a service.
Great idea.
It should be. We could monetize this even.
Yeah.
Dial a poet.
Somebody with the
Dial a
entrepreneurial
poet.
spirit needs to get on this.
Yeah. There's something about hearing both of you read. I mean, some poems, I can get them off the page and they mean a lot to me. Or actually, I think now it reminds me to, when I'm reading poetry, it's just helpful in general to read it out loud, even if it's not yours, read somebody else's out loud. But hearing both of you is just, it's just really mind-blowing that you're reading, the talent that you have when you're reading. And of course, the skill of the poetry that puts it together. So, so there's, let's see what, I just want to keep up. Yeah, a weekly Zoom, a poetry telegram by Zoom, says Robbie. That would be cool. Yeah, there's a gig to explore. And then Tony says, I would read poetry to people all day if I could, especially if it's not mine. I love covering people's work, especially cold reads. I'm a weird performer. Oh, well, cool. Yeah. You want to say more about how you're a weird performer? It's irresistible not to ask you that.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that I'll get on stage. I'll take the time to move the microphone away, the stand away. I don't like either one of those things because I tend to take up the whole stage, and I also try to teach a workshop to get other people to do it, and because there's too many podium poets in my opinion, and so I'm trying to get people to move.
Yeah, cool.
And I think cold reads are good for your own work, not just reading but writing. I think the more you just pick up a poetry book, turn to any page and read it out loud, I think you learn a lot about your own voice, and it helps with writing.
Very good advice. Yeah. So Robbie once did a reading dressed as a fly. That's really cool. And it is Halloween, so we can really appreciate that even more. So let's see. So does anyone have any questions you want to ask about the actual poems? We certainly could go in that direction. So I just want to invite if anybody has any specific questions or anything more you want to say, or I can ask a few questions, or Karen or Sonia, if you want to ask each other questions.
It's more a remark, Karen, when we were getting toward the end of yours and you were sort of talking about the blending of fiction and autobiography. I think one of the things that's really interesting is always the presumption that poetry is 100% autobiographical, as if there's something that's some rule that says that it has to be entirely memoir. And I don't know that that's always in the best interest of the poem itself, which is ultimately what matters, is I presume that is the text. I mean, there's obviously ethical issues outside of the context of that conversation. But, and I was telling Phyllis beforehand, I really like writing in the speculative realm because I like to be a revisionist about reality. But I think what you were saying about that poem is that, you have absolutely every right to blend fiction with autobiography because it's a poem, it's not a memoir.
And whose life is that interesting, really?
Mine isn't.
It's kind of like, if you really want to put out books and make people think about things and make yourself think about things that didn't happen to you, it's like fiction is the only way to go, honestly. I mean, it's not even really an opinion because it didn't happen to you. I write about all kinds of things that didn't happen to me because for the most part, I'm an introvert and I really like my house. If I'm going to write about the world at all, I got to make stuff up sometimes.
I think too that we have to ask about reality, and our own realities when we write, what really did happen. And it doesn't matter ultimately if what we write blends what we perceive as reality with some form of fiction. That becomes its own reality. It becomes the speaker's reality if it's a poem. It becomes a character's reality in general with any sort of work. Even a work that's titled as autobiography or biography has some skewer of nonfiction versus fiction. Nothing really sits directly in this is reality. So I think that in that sense too, it's okay to play with it and to just go with what feels best for the purpose of the poem.
Yeah, well, really well said. Yeah. So Robbie wrote a really interesting and it's something in the chat that is saying that it was. Is it okay if I mention this, Robbie? That she has some trauma poems that were actually actual experiences, and it seemed that those were harder to get published. So she's wondering if you would write something that has why deliberately writing something that didn't actually happen. I think that's I think these trauma poems are hard. They're really important. For me personally, I have to write them, just like I was saying that, in the introduction, that both of you feel you have to write. It's like it doesn't want to stay silent. So, yeah, you're saying I didn't necessarily want to write them, but I had to. Yeah. So
Same. And Sonia, I don't know about your pony called Loneliness, if you felt compelled in the same way to write that poem, even though there wasn't an actual pony called Loneliness. I mean, it exists truly on some level because it makes you cry every time that you read it.
yeah.
And as for my poem, Little Shrimp, and my poem, Badass Mermaid, there are huge swaths in those poems of fact as I see it. And anything that may be perceived as fiction, it may be a fiction as far as my own life, but I'm sure that somebody had those things happen, or experiences that match up. And that's what's important. It's not ultimately at the end of the day at all what happened to me personally as a human being or not. It matters what I create so that the reader can then read it and connect with it through their own experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is painful, and I think people sometimes it's hard for people to hear these really traumatic poems, and they don't want to believe it's true, or they have a very strong response to it. So that's why you have to feel ready to read it. Maybe to put it out there. Sometimes we write poems. I write poems anyway that don't go anywhere for various reasons. They stay with me. But
Well, and I would say, and trust me, I'm not saying this to try to get sympathy, because I'm not. As being a straight white male, like, it's hard for me to put trauma out in the world, because I've got it good. Like, there's no doubt straight white men in the world really have it good. And so to try to get people to come to me with the sadness for my poetry, like, it's, to me, it's just like, I could go down that road, but there are people out there with the actual problems, and I will let them take the stage with those. And I'm going to write about other things that I find interesting, because ultimately I've got it all right. It's not fair that I do, but I do, so that's maybe an unpopular opinion, but that's kind of the way I work.
yeah. Does anyone else want to say anything about writing about trauma?
I write poems about having miscarriages, and I know I'm a guy and I can never have one. But my mother, I write through, like, my mother, she's had miscarriages, so I write poems for her, in a sense, to let out her trauma.
I write poems about cats, and I'm not a cat.
I'm sorry. I should have muted before I laughed.
No, it's fine. I mean, I meant that to be funny, but also serious, that there's too much right now in the literary community and the artistic community as a whole. Oh, if you write about someone who's not you, you're going to get canceled, and that's wrong. We should, as artists, be able to write about human experiences and other experiences, because they are things that we can see and feel in the world.
Yeah, I wrote about dying, and I've never died yet. So
Yeah, really, really,
but
really good
but
point.
That you know of.
Yeah. But we're all gonna die one day, and so I try to write it to make it more comfortable. But there's one I just want to say, and I tell this story now. My grandmother died for 12 minutes, and she came back, and so I asked her about it, because that's, oh, why not? But and two, she's religious, she believes in God and stuff, and you hear all these people who die and come back, and they say, oh, I've seen the gates of heaven and Jesus, blah blah blah. I'm not religious, but so I figured if anyone had seen any heavenly stuff, she was gone long enough for it, she should. But she told me, and it was way more relaxing, and no one go kill themselves, but she said it was the most peaceful sleep that she had ever had. She said it was tranquil and quiet and soothing. And she said it was so lovely. And I thought to myself, in a peacefulness, oh, I'm really good at sleeping. I do it once a day. So if it's just like having the best sleep of your life, it made me less nervous and worried, because we're all going to pass away eventually. But if you can have a peacefulness about it, it's not as scary.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it's really wonderful the way you're writing about family members, but and kind of that intergenerational kind of trauma that it affects you and future generations, even though it didn't happen directly to you.
And two, I think, what if that had been me instead of another, and another one, I wouldn't have been here. So you think of stuff like, or I think too, and this might be horrendous, but if she hadn't had the miscarriage, then I definitely wouldn't have been here, because she's had two, and she had one, and like 2 months later she got pregnant with me. So in the same sense too, it's a horrible blessing, because I wouldn't have been here otherwise, and someone else would have.
Yeah. Wow, this is really, really great discussion. I can think of so many more things to talk about. So shall we, how about if we hear a little bit more, just to change onto your books a little bit, like, can you tell us, since we don't have them in our hands, like how are they set up and how did you arrange them? And
Sure. Well, I got this postcard that's almost just like a book.
Oh, that's so cool.
It has one poem on the back of it. So I'm trying to send those out, or they're supposed to come with the books or something like that.
It's the neatest chapbook I've read in a while, Sonia. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you got one in the mail.
I got mine, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
The book that's coming out is split up into 2 sections, and the sort of guiding principle of the book is sort of the way personal experience informs empathy. And it's also takes a sort of a look at fate, right? But also, like I said, I do like to be a bit of a revisionist. So a lot of the poems sort of take a look at what really happened, and then said, I don't like what really happened, so I'm just going to write a poem that's going to make me feel better, because it's going to change the story. And then hopefully the reader will also go, oh yeah, that was so much better than the real things. So that's sort of a lot of what the book is going on in the book.
And which one is this?
All Possible Histories.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Karen?
Well, for my forthcoming book, Diving at the Lip of the Water, it really is a narrative history of human experience. And again, whether that human experience is mine or others, or a combination of these two things, I'll leave that up to the reader to decide and connect with it as the reader does. But that's the way that it goes. It starts out in one space, and it just keeps moving through, so that the reader by the end has a complete history.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, so Tony, this looks like a really good question, but I think we're gonna start to wind down. So maybe it's something that you can ask the two of them another
Oh,
time.
I was just asking everybody as a whole, but that's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just curiosity.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the question. Now it's about how you prepare the books, in the process of preparing books and working on them. And that's, yeah, it's a long process with a lot of work. Yeah.
Can I just offer one thought to that?
Yeah.
Generally, it's good to have an organizing principle for me. And one of the things that I like to use is, I think about Blake's movement from innocence to experience.
Wow.
And I will often use that as a way to guide a book structure, from the poems that start out unaware of the world and then display a kind of wisdom, maybe a weary wisdom, as they move through time. So that's been one of the things that I've used as a guiding principle for how
Oh,
I
wow.
organize my books.
That's worth writing down. That's beautiful.
That is beautiful. I guess I've never thought of it that way, and I don't think I'll think of organizing poems again in any way but that, because
Yeah.
that seems very wise. What I do is I just print out the poems that I think will be included, and I throw them on the floor, and I figure out, okay, what really starts this word? Where does it really start? And it's not always with the first poem that I wrote for that collection, right? It has to have the movement through.
Mhm.
So having it all printed out, I know that's not friendly to trees really, but maybe use recycled paper that's printed on the other side. And I like to just spread it out along the floor until I've got it right.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of people. I've heard Ellen Bass say this, and also one of the readers that I had, but oh gosh, I can't remember. I'm gonna blank on her name, but she, cutting out the lines to rearrange the lines if you're trying to edit a poem. So yeah, a more compact way of doing that, or than the whole book, but reminds me of that. So yeah, so Robbie, did you have something you wanted to say? And then I'm going to read my poem to end us up.
Yeah, I was going to say that I banged my head against the wall with this latest collection that hasn't yet found a home.
Mhm.
And you never know where the organizing principle is going to come from. It came from an episode of Star Trek Discovery. And I sure didn't expect that, but there it was.
That's really amazing. Very
Yeah,
intriguing.
it's from a conservation of matter principle by a French physicist from the 19th century. And it's called, can I remember what it's called? I can't. Everything, I can't, sorry. Let's see.
Yeah,
My
that's okay.
computer will tell me.
Mm,
Everything will be transformed.
yeah. Well, we can certainly relate to the agony of rejection. Yeah. So we're with you on that.
Mhm.
So I just want to thank everybody so much. Thank the two of you. It's really been a terrific experience having both of you, and really you've got my number actually, so do call.
Oh, speaking of
Yeah.
your number, I should mention that I've been enjoying Phyllis's book here myself,
Oh,
actually.
thank you.
Yeah. It's organized like a newspaper, which is really cool.
Mm.
And there's a lot of heart in these poems. And what I like about them is how much they care for the world. And
Oh, thank you.
there's a real sort of generosity and nurturing in these poems. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Beautiful collection. I have it too.
Mm. I appreciate that. And now you're going to hear another one from me, which is for my dermatologist. And I did want to say there's that Dr. David J. Elpern. I wanted to shout out to him because he's a dermatologist who has come to my readings sometimes. And he edits this or he curates this a website that has poetry on it. It's called Dermanities, an online journal of community and person-centered healthcare. And so it's a really cool place to read stuff. And that's where this poem lives. For my dermatologist, who is fantastic. If anybody needs a Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area dermatologist, just let me know and I'll refer you. Ode to the Skin Check for Dr. Elizabeth Gould. Oh, splendid skin, major organ, unashamed, external, interweaving of warp and weft on loom of a body. Familiar with cancers, the skin, sensitive, too close to the sun, burned with ultraviolet ghosts of rays haunting its surface when adolescents on picnics at beaches wouldn't be caught dead with umbrellas. Days of bare heads before invention of sunscreen, days of baby oil with iodine and sun-reflecting foils recommended to increase the tan that never came. Only blisters, scales, pomegranate-colored burns. Aloe lotions, noxemas melting into scalded expanse. Do not forget me and what I have to say. Oh, splendid skin check, dermatologist peering into skin's finished fabric for defects, rough spots, basils, night spider bites of melanoma. Oh, liquid nitrogen, burning savior, night watchman with a torch. Oh, biopsies, slivers of parchment, thin fiber, sliced for microscopes. Oh, waiting for results, for knowledge learned too late, written into cellular memory, Icarus in a free fall, or 6 more months of absolution. Thank you. And thanks again, everybody, so much for being here. And oh, and just to say, next time we're going to have Ginny Connors and Richard Cole. Ginny is the owner of the Grayson Books. She's a wonderful publisher. And I know her because she published my book. And Richard won the prize, the Grayson Prize last year. So that'll be coming up in a little early in November. And hope to see as many of you as can make it. And again, thanks for coming. And take care. Happy Halloween. Hi, it's me again. And I'm here because I decided that I wanted to make a little addition to the reading that we had with Sonia and Karen. The reason being is that I feel like we almost went into a trance while they were reading and afterwards, and we didn't really talk that much about the actual poetry, the craft, and the talent of the writing. So I'm going to try to do that by myself. And be aware that whatever I say is just my opinion. I haven't actually checked with Sonia or Karen about it. They weren't available for this segment. So I'm going to give you my thoughts, and hopefully that will round out and enlarge the experience of hearing them read. So I'd like to start with Karen's poem, Womb. And I want to read some of the lines and talk to you a little bit about my thoughts and feelings about this beautiful poem, which she said during the reading she had written for a friend who had a miscarriage. So she starts with interior sister liminal. Then she moves to tender hive. She nested in you, grew thick-walled and large. And that's, to me, that's so evocative of a fetus growing, and then the fetus doesn't make it, because let's see, in her next existence, she will emerge and soar. So that next existence tells us everything. She will live as a bird, carrying and dispersing seed. How beautiful for anyone who's lost a baby. the baby. She will live as a field of flowers. Bees with dust their legs with her pollen dance. Remember her scent. Bring her back to their hive. Bring her home to herself. What happens when a baby doesn't make it? These poems, Karen and Sonia, there's so much emotion in them. And the next one I want to talk about is Karen's opus, in my opinion, for child abuse, called Little Shrimp. There's this poem to me is it's both disturbing and healing because it's giving a voice to something that actually does happen, even though she says that it's not clear whether this actually did happen, if it's all true. So, we're not trying to think when we're reading it or hearing it. I don't particularly think it's important to try to figure out, well, what really happened. There's so much fantasy in here, and the fantasy of the shrimp and the shrimp as a child that is so it's just so creative. I mean, when you think about Little Shrimp, of course, some kids have that nickname, right? And kids are kind of shrimps, they're shrimpy. So then you turn it into a metaphor for a real shrimp being the child and all the things that the shrimp can do. So the shrimp can sniff not normal out. The shrimp can hide under surfaces and keep quiet. The shrimp tells us about how the shrimp can figure things out. Like, I knew where I touched with my shrimp sense, antenna, long and feeling, grasping through taste and scent. Swimmerets, my long appendages for swimming and breathing. These two activities, interchangeable, integral to my being. Then we go to, maybe I cry an ocean to swim in, to continue to breathe. Maybe I cry an ocean that actually keeps me alive. So the way she's talking here, she's not addressing things directly, but we get it, that tears are going to save you, right? My translucent skin, she mentions that Karen mentions the translucent skin. And then she says later on, young without a mother to protect her. I can see through the translucence of her being. So can my mother. So she's talking about Rhoda, another little shrimp with short hair like mine. She says, I can see through the translucence of her being. So can my mother. So that feeling of being completely visible, and someone with ill intent could look into you and want to harm you. As I said earlier, this poem, it's traumatic, and there's certainly a trigger warning about it. But I don't see it as depressing for people who are listening. At least that's my view on it. Again, the imagery, the art, the and the speaking of the truth, and that these things actually do happen, and the fact that the little shrimp has survived, and how this actually, how child abuse affects children. It's super important. and a super important voice and poem. So I'm going to skip Badass Mermaid. I want to talk about that little bit later, and just mention the poem, Karen's poem about for Robert, which is called In That Place. And the reason I love this poem is because it reminds me of a fox that I saw in Marin when I was on vacation. And this poem is about a fox that Robert saw and told a story about. And it starts, each point sings alive on his fiery amber fur. What a beautiful description of the fox's fur. And then we have the fox waiting there in pine's oxblood heat. The oxblood heat of pines. To think about that more. That's quite a provocative image that I need to actually sit with and think about. Then moving down the poem, so I just skip around. I'm skipping around in all these poems. Eyes lock yours and the fox's. You wish to stand still, forever yield, where time launches its impeccable flow like a river, stirs you to think of everything you see unwinding in the light. And then we have this gorgeous last line. Then the fox says, let this make you what you are. How do we even say anything more about that? No, nothing more is needed. That's one of those lines that gives you the chills and makes you think about all the wild animals you've ever seen. And it makes me want to write about that more. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to Sonia's poems. And then I'm going to talk about a poem of Karen's and Sonia's that I wanted to talk about together. So let's see. And the ones that so Sonia's poems, there's again, it's the emotion and the grief that in the poems that she read, the main emotion that I realized as I read them again and thought about them more is the grief, which I just, it's so moving, so touching, so much what we want to know about. And the one that I want to talk about the most right now is the prayer to Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost things. And the epigraph is, Saint Anthony, who received from God the special power of restoring lost things, grant that I might find that which has been lost. So we're right into a poem about losing things. Now, there have been probably many thousands of poems about lost things and losing things. And I can think of Naomi Shihab Nye's poem about the yellow glove. And this poem, it hits, and to me, it hits a mark that's just as high as that one. And it spells out what happened when you think about all these things that have been lost. It's a great writing prompt. Think about all the things you've lost and how you feel about it. So Sonia, in her brilliance, she's writing to Saint Anthony. She says, grant that I may find my mojo. That's the first thing she wants to find. Misplaced in middle age and replaced with progressive lenses and a penchant for Sunday crosswords. So it's kind of, so here, this is so lighthearted. And then as it goes on, it's just going to grab you just right where your tears start from. So the next thing she does is she calls him Tony. So going down a few lines, Tony, how many millions of earrings have you found since the beginning of Catholic time? Well, for those of us who wear earrings, there's no way you can't relate to that. And then she wants to know, well, what she wants to know if it's a theoretical glimmering mountain of baubles that reaches your cloud. Is it knobby with pearls and woven through with gold wires? So here we have this image of St. Anthony up on a cloud with these earrings, piles and piles of earrings that are woven through with gold wires, knobby with pearls. Somebody should paint that. Let's see, you must manage one hell of a spreadsheet. Now, here, this next line, patron saint of relief, of signs for missing cats, of hopeless pleading for new hymens. Okay, so where did that line go? It took us from relief, signs for missing cats. Okay, so that's starting to get really dire and really sad. And then we go to hopeless pleading for new hymens. So she doesn't have to say anything more about that. There it is. Then she wants to know if there are any helpers, if St. Anthony has any helpers, because he must be kind of sweaty and tired from all of this. And then here's the next one that is going somewhere so deep. Tony, do you cry when you can't find a boy because he already sits by your side? And the boy's mother keeps you up all night with her begging, but you are powerless to return anything besides ashen flesh. So this lighthearted Tony, and are you sweating? Are you tired? And then this, do you cry with this child who died that you can't bring him back to the mother? Then now Sonia goes back to St. Anthony looking for his own mojo and wondering, convinced you'd be better off restoring heirloom brooches and fountain pens, better at bringing a corgi back from his wandering. Would you like to switch jobs with Francis and frolic for once with the lambs, instead of just sending the lost ones home? And now here we go, another gut smasher. On the news, I saw you bring a body back from Nam and saw how you reunited birth mother with daughter. We're always losing St. Anthony. No, sorry, we're always losing Tony, St. Anthony, who received from God the special power of restoring lost things. Where are all the socks? We had to get to the socks, right? Lighters and wallets, the hair ties, lip balms, and iPhones. And then the last few lines. Do you keep collections to count in heaven some calm in the careful numeration of unclaimed car keys? And that's how it ends. So, let me find another one here. Then we have the one about I want a pony. And again, here, this poem says so much in such a beautifully poetic way. The epigraph is the medium of poetry. The medium of poetry isn't language, really, it's loneliness. A loneliness that poets transfer to their readers. So we know this is about loneliness. the title is I Want a Poem, and then it proceeds, I want a pony called Loneliness. I'm going to have a hard time not reading all of this because each line is so beautiful, but let me see. I'll corral him in my front yard, just behind a low white fence. And then she talks about children coming and bringing him things, and whispering in his ears, which will twitch to hear such secrets. And now the pony is going from the pony called Loneliness. She sneaks this in on us. My loneliness will tease the feral cats that slink from yard to yard, looking for new places to shit. My loneliness would nicker softly in the night when peacocks on a neighbor's roof wake us with their mating cries. Okay, then the loneliness is going to do some other things. Be saddled, wants to be saddled and ridden. Wouldn't mind a heavy load. And when my loneliness gets very tired, I'll drive him to tender and endless grasses. So here comes the most grief upon grief, loneliness that's going to be, even the loneliness is going to be removed. We're going to lose the loneliness. I'll drive him to tendless and endless grasses where he will graze, his old gray muzzle mowing towards the west, while I walk back to my truck, wiping snot from my nose with a sleeve. And then when I get home, everyone will ask where my loneliness went. I'll say he was so old, that it was too hard to see him that way. It was too painful. And my front yard will stand empty, his trough dry, his little lawn gone to hay. I don't know. I want to be sad, and this poem makes me so sad. And I want that. It's who hasn't felt lonely? Who hasn't felt abandoned? So now I want to switch gears and spend a little bit of time with Karen's poem, Badass Mermaid, and Sonia's poem, Helen of Troy is High AF. And I thought, as I was reading these, and I've read them a number of times, I wanted to compare and contrast because they're both dealing with Greek mythology. So Badass Mermaid does have a tone of being a badass mermaid with lines that have to do with them. Let's see. Then I could write like a seer, everything and everywhere, a messenger. I do not drown, badass mermaid. I breathe water, I breathe air, I derange. Pitched roofs, pitched reefs. I say your name, write your nightmare. She's talking to Odysseus there. Dive back under, scaled with your fear. My tail smacks down, flashed lightning, ear-rending thunder. And then at the end, irritated clam creates the pearl in turn creates me. I love that. Then I create, write, surrender, open a universe, land and sea. So the badass mermaid has kind of an awakening and it gets in touch with her rage. And also earlier on in the poem, there's a lot of vulnerability. She says, Karen says, I, innocent too, innocently fell asleep, dry iced, packed in snow that does not freeze, leagues and leagues deep, countless. your rage silvered and glinted on your teeth and eye. That was again Odysseus. No matter, soon back home, spring. Somehow I didn't care. I slept until I woke. So let's see, where's the line that I'm looking for that I in your realm a siren, not yet, but sobbing. So there's a movement here from a someone who's really trying to find herself, feeling really wounded, really damaged, really afraid, and up against a formidable opponent in Odysseus, of course. And so then when I got to Helen of Troy, Sonia's poem, I really, really wanted, I just was convinced that Helen of Troy was going to be badass also, because that's how I think of Helen of Troy, launching 1,000 ships and, helping them win the war and all that. But Sonia's poem is not, I read it many times and it's not, now anyway, I'm not seeing it from a point as written from a woman who's writing from a point of strength. So there's a couple of things here. One is a language warning. And the other is that this poem is about sexual assault and rape. So take care of yourself if that isn't really what you want to be hearing about when you listen to this. So the title is Helen of Troy is High AF. I didn't really know what High AF was. So I looked it up, and it means too high to write. And actually high as in drugged out. And the terminology is high as fuck. And the epigraph to this poem, and actually there's a word blocked out, but I'll read most of it. Then the child of Zeus, Helen, decided she would mix the wine with drugs to take all pain and rage away, to bring forgetfulness. And this is from the Odyssey, translated by Emily Wilson, sorry. So, so this poem starts with a comparison between entomology, which is the study of insects, and etymology, which is the derivation of words, the meaning and derivation of words. And so the idea of talking about insects is really it's having Helen of Troy talking about insects in this very specific way, these descriptions of bugs. Let's see. So she says, I'd know if you meant meaning, so that would be entomology, or just a clacking of beetles, just a phalanx of carapace carried by 100 legs, as in centi, or 1,000 as in milli. So I think of these bugs, they're really tiny, and they're really important in the world of fauna and flora. But in the scheme of things, bugs are kind of unimportant. And then Helen says, but my mind is modest these days. And then she says, even modestly minded, I know it's no mistake that abduction shares a word with what penetrates me, rape. So then Sonia goes on to talk about sexual assault in various forms for many women. make all women who are raped. And then she goes a few lines down from there, she goes into the personal for Helen of Troy. And then Helen talks about that in the transgenerational trauma. You must recall my mother was force fucked by a swan, and that's our fate. Our citizenship so tenuous, you even get taken by the birds. So there again is that fragility and that terrible image. Yeah. And then Sonia goes on to write, you've heard how we bury our children, how we watch war made with wooden horses, how we get dragged to hell because poor Hades needs a date. And as consolation, they give us poppy powder for our wine. And, to me, I start thinking this is really very contemporary. And then Helen of Troy says, I say another dram of dream in mine. I am such a scholar for forgetting, such a student of letting go. I say, set the table to a swarm of servants buzzing in the corners of this opulent palace. So she goes back to bugs in such a beautiful way. I say, anoint the chalice to Menelaus, who lets me be as shit-faced as I please until morning wipes the prior day clean and I can try living again. And isn't that really what addictions are all about? The trauma and then the trying to forget it. And then she says at the end, until then I may hallucinate that the 1,000 launch ships never come back. Will you, my guest, drink to that? And so I think for me anyway, what she's saying there, what Helen is saying is, I don't want to be here. And I wish that the war had ended differently. So I just would never have to come back and face all this. So, a really, just a really terribly difficult poem, and yet written in such a beautiful way, and also the language and the discussion and how Helen is addressing the reader, addressing us with this really kind of colorful language. It just it does give me the feeling that she is spunky, and I'm just hoping that there's some way to get to the badass mermaid. So I'm going to end there. I do, since we're not together, I do want to invite anybody who wants to comment or connect with me. You can reach me at poetry@phyllispoetry.com. And again, thanks so much for coming to the readings and for watching the recordings. Hope to see you next time in the new year. Until then, take care.